What led this person to think that if he went and murdered a completely innocent dad and husband and leader, what would that accomplish? And the forces behind that are this awful, terroristic, demonic transgender movement. And, it's interesting. You look at the transgender movement. I use the word demonic very, very deliberately. It may make some people uncomfortable, but the reality is, we are created by God. There are forces aligned against God. And as long as we're here on earth, on this side of the heaven, we have to deal with those forces. If you read any sort of literature, if you study anything from the Catholic Church, which I think has a long history of doing exorcisms, you learn there's a couple things that demons love to do. They have their own names, they have their own voices. And what's the first thing that happens when someone, whether they're mentally ill or possessed, does when they decide to become transgender? They go and change their name. They go and change their voice. They effectively kill the person they were and become this new awful thing. And so you have Charlie out there saying basic truths like boys can't become girls. Girls can't become boys. God is real. You shouldn't be dishonoring him by mutilating your body. That drives the demons absolutely insane, makes them froth at the mouth. And then they decide, you know what we need to do? Rather than just accept the truth, we need to go and snuff out this voice. We need to go kill the voices of people who say this thing that boys can't be girls. Charlie was not the first victim of it. Sadly, I don't think he will be the last. We have transgender shootings basically all the time in this country. If you look at recent mass shootings, they're overwhelmingly done by trans individuals seeking revenge on people who say or who believe that boys can't become girls. It happened in Nashville at the Covenant shooting, where you had a trans individual decide that the people who really needed to pay for not buying into trans ideology were Christian third graders, that those were the kids who needed to be murdered. That's who needed to be murdered to pay for the awful truth that boys can't become girls and vice versa. You had it happen in a Christian church in Minnesota. And then you had this trans connected individual, Tyler Robinson, who had this boyfriend who hated Charlie. And so he went up and he climbed that roof and he pulled the trigger. And instead of the country being able to take a step back and say, you know what, this is insane. Why are we letting children mutilate themselves? Why are we pumping people full of hormones? Why are we telling people to eviscerate completely healthy organs? We have half the country go out and say, no, actually, you're just fine. It's everyone who says reality, who believes in reality, who's wrong. To me, it would be akin to a doctor who has a bulimic and anorexic patient come in. Someone who might be weighing 60, 75 pounds, but believes they're fat. And it would be the doctor saying to them, yep, you are fat. You're disgusting and obese. And what we're going to do to make this image of yourself align with your physical body, we're going to help you lose weight. Person who's deeply, deeply unwell, probably on the verge of death. We're going to actually make you skinnier because that would be the compassionate thing to do. I think everyone understands how awful and evil that would be. And yet we have half the country telling these trans individuals, yep, you actually are a girl, not a boy, and you're amazing and nothing's wrong with you. And you know what? Those people who are telling you you're not a girl and the boys can't become girls, they're the real people and you should go kill them, because killing them will make you feel better. Killing them will make it all go away. That's why this happened. Tyler Robinson pulled the trigger, but it was this evil transgender ideology that got him on the roof, that put it in that gun, that convinced him that pulling that trigger and killing that wonderful man would make all his hurt and all his anger go away. And until we address that head on, we're going to see this keep happening. It might be me next. It might be you next who get it. It might be a bunch of innocent kids at a Christian school in a state in the heartland, but it's going to keep happening until we can all come together and finally call this out for what it is, which is demonic insanity.
You've been around the block a lot. You've been able to see ops. You've been able to see the distraction mechanisms or just the for-profit vengeance in order to deceive the American people or to take advantage of weak-minded people. What has gone on in the last 9 months has been the opposite of the watershed moment that you're talking about, Sean. It should have been that. It should have been an opportunity to go kick in doors of every Antifa club. Taking a step back, let's say it was a bunch of Methodists who kept doing school shootings and slaughtering innocent kids. And let's just say, instead of slaughtering innocent kids at mosques, all right, or synagogues. If it were a bunch of Methodists doing that, you damn well believe the Methodist Church would be shut down in America today. that they would shutter every single church door, that they would have convicted every single leader, and they would have, like, the feds would have effectively shut down whatever branch and every single person that ever touched a denomination. If the Methodist Church was continuing, and I'm not trying to pick on Methodists here, my grandmother was a Methodist, but like just to swap out one ideology for another. If that were happening, we all know the response. That branch of Christianity would be branch Davidian, right? They'd send in the tanks with the flamethrowers. And yet we've gotten nothing. In fact, if anything, we've gotten like nobody talking about the transgender element to the attack here. And also something that no one ever brings up was that Charlie Kirk seemingly was murdered because he had been speaking for, I think, close to an hour, actually, up to that point. Charlie Kirk was murdered when speaking about transgender people. He was talking about transgender violence the moment he was killed. And I don't think that that's on accident. I think that was purposeful. Yet it's been entirely lost in all of this, in what seems to be just like maybe the world's largest PSYOP, the most destructive PSYOP that our movement has ever seen, bigger than Russiagate, and more damaging morally. I'm sorry for the lecture here, but I just want your take on the architecture of what's gone on in the last 9 months.
Yeah, there was a moment where it felt like everyone could finally acknowledge that maybe it's time to break the fever, to acknowledge the insanity, to go in and crack down on Antifa and Trans-Tifa and be like, your left-wing insane terrorism is over. Shut down the bank accounts, start dragging them out in dawn raids and say, it's over, playtime is over. You don't get to just kill people and perpetrate this kind of violence whenever you want. And that moment never came. And you asked for the reason. Unfortunately, I don't think there is a single reason. I think we're always wanting to be able to say it's this person's fault. It's this thing that caused it. On the left, you had a bunch of people who are just glad Charlie was murdered. They would go out and say, actually, a trans person didn't kill him, and it's good that he did. You had Jimmy Kimmel try and pretend that it was a right-winger who did it, which is just retarded. But he does that because he's a total Democrat partisan and he doesn't want to admit that his side is ever wrong. And so they have to create lies to make themselves feel better because they know deep down they don't want to actually be responsible or associated with that kind of violence. So you had kind of half the country there who was like, oh, we don't want to take any responsibility for this. So we're going to pretend Charlie was shot by one of his own friends. So that's one reason, is that we couldn't get half the country to buy into the idea that maybe you just shouldn't go murder people who say things you don't like. Then on the right, I think you have a lot of people who just probably due to COVID and so much of the nonsense that's been perpetrated on us by the government, who just refuse to believe anything that approximates an official story. So the second you had someone come out and say, yeah, we got the guy, this is him, without even thinking, you have a whole segment of people who are like, oh, well, so that's not true. So now they're setting themselves into this like spiraling cycle of nonsense where each time there's a new fact, their confirmation bias causes them to reject it and move on and move on. You have a whole bunch of people who may have resented Charlie on the right because he was more successful and more influential than he was, and they don't like all the attention he's getting. It's pretty nasty kind of a thing to take hold of you. I think you have a lot of people who are so amoral or maybe even evil, they just saw an opportunity to make this about themselves. You know, the meme of you get in there and make it about you. So I think you have all these competing different motives in different personalities who are more interested in their inner baser desires than they were about justice. And sadly, where we are as a country, I'm sorry, we're just not a godly people anymore. And we want godly things and we want godly blessings. We want his favor, and yet we don't want to do any of the things that are generally required to do that. So where do we find ourselves? We find ourselves as a nation divided against itself. We can't agree on basic truths about reality. We're driven by base inner desires for attention or profit or influence. And so we end up in the situation where we are. I think it's heartbreaking. I think it's tragic. As a people, we need to collectively repent to God for what we've done and what we've said and what we've believed. Ask him to forgive us and restore us, and hope that he might continue to shower his grace and favor and blessings on us. Absent that, I don't know why anyone would expect things to get any better here. We have thousands of years of history to show us what happens when a people apostatize from God. We are in the midst of that as the American people now. And until that changes, I don't see anything politically or spiritually or economically changing in this country either.